Welcome, everyone. This is Recovery Dharma. My name is Julia. I'm one of the facilitators of the Spokane Sangha, and I'd like to set the intention for our practice today with a sentiment of loving kindness. And I'm just going to go around my little bowl here and find a sentiment. This one reads, "May you stay open. May you stay open." Friends, for the month of June in the Spokane Sangha, we have been exploring the theme of love, Maitri, Metta, loving kindness. And we've been exploring it as an invitation to examine our notions and stories around what love is. Conditional love, transactional love, unconditional love, love for self, love for others, love that turns into hate, hate that's motivated by fear. So we've had a wonderful, deep look into this overarching concept. And one of the things that I want to encourage is the idea of treating love as air. You are both in it, surrounded by it, and it is also in you. It is separate from you and completely connected to you at the same time. There's a wonderful spiritual teaching that I like to call not one, not two. And it relates to the sun and the warmth that it gives and provides. So the sun and its warmth are not separate from one another, and yet they're not one and the same thing either. Water and waves is another great example. A wave is water, and yet it's something unique to the water itself. So love is very, very similar in that the way it comes alive in each of us is unique, and yet it's the thing that keeps us all together. It's the thing that holds everything. It's the great infinite screen upon which we can project everything. The good, the bad, the hopeful, the hopeless, sobriety, recurrence, misuse. It's all there in the great sphere of love. We've also been spending a lot of time playing with the notion of, there's an adage out there that goes, in order for you to really love someone, you have to first love yourself. And while that's true, it is not the whole truth. Because sometimes in loving someone, we gain access in that mutuality to learn how to better love ourselves. But it didn't necessarily start with me. It started with me being animated with somebody else, really wanting their happiness, their freedom from suffering. And in all of those actions and intentions, I've learned something about myself. And perhaps in my devotion and love to someone, I learn how to receive their love. And in that mutual exchange of receiving somebody's love, that's the threshold, that's the access point in which I can learn to better love myself. So the adage of I have to love myself first. That word first is a bit heavy-handed. So how about we drop it? And how about we reimagine the phrase and say something like, learning to love myself is learning to love others. Learning to love others is learning to love myself. That feels more authentic to my mind. And one of the things that we're doing in this practice is we're exploring the conditions that act as inhibitors to receiving and sharing love. And they can come in all shapes and sizes. One of the greatest inhibitors that paradoxically serves as a great teacher, a masterful teacher, is regret. Regret as an inhibitor can fill our minds with all kinds of stories that because we have engaged in unskillful, unnoble, destructive behavior and caused harm, we are not worthy of somebody else's love. We are not worthy of forgiveness. We are not worthy of mercy and leniency. And by perpetuating those narratives, we not only inhibit receiving love from others, but because we have that embedded as our own personal story, it then becomes a projection outward, and we limit our capacity to be lenient, forgiving, merciful, encouraging, unconditional in our love toward others. Today I'd like to read a little bit from a book called Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior. And it is written by a once venerated human being whose actions led to great disgrace. And I'm bringing this forward because yesterday in our beginning Buddhism class, we were reminded of something called the 8 worldly concerns, or I've often heard of it as the 8 worldly winds, 4 pairs of opposites that are the foundation of suffering and our inability to connect with loving kindness towards self and others. One of them is fame and disgrace. This guy, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, was famous. He had almost a cult-like following. And then it was discovered that he engaged in all manner of misconduct, and he was disgraced. How do we hold that? I don't have any answer to that. It's a deeply personal question. How do you hold that? This person wrote this book and had a lot of wisdom to share, and I'm going to share it today, and I think that's my way of exercising a little bit of leniency respect for this person's wisdom, respect for the fact that they had capacity to engage in these ancient principles. And right beside that, this person was enormously human, got caught up in the myth of themselves, greed, ignorance, confusion. And just like me, I can get caught up in all that stuff too. And that's why it is so important to practice working with praise and blame, with some degree of equanimity, working with fame and disgrace. People are going to experience enormous popularity, and somebody's going to come along and question their reputation. How are you going to hold that? How can you not be so inflated by praise and then completely deflated by disgrace? I bring this forward because regret has the same capacity. We can inflate regret to epic proportion. So much regret that we inhibit our capacity for self-love, to receive love, and to give love. So the practice is to look at the ways we inflate and distort and try to find equanimity, try to find balance and harmony. It's why it's a practice. So this comes from a chapter called Discovering Basic Goodness. No matter what you've done and no matter what you've not done, at the core of every being is basic goodness. He writes, "A great deal of chaos in the world occurs because people don't appreciate themselves. Having never developed sympathy or gentleness toward themselves, they cannot experience harmony or peace within, and therefore what they project to others is also inharmonious and confused. Instead of appreciating our lives, we often take our existence for granted, or we find it depressing and burdensome. We have to accept personal responsibility for uplifting our lives. And the reality is, when we don't punish or condemn ourselves, we begin to relax and begin to see the fundamental notion of basic goodness in yourself. That's it. Basic goodness. That's what we're coming home to. And that basic goodness for many people in the realm of recovery has been buried, burned to ash. And yet that's illusory, because basic goodness is incorruptible. There is a seed of basic goodness in all of us here today and in every sentient being out there. And let me tell you, one of my favorite teachers for trying to discover basic goodness, I have two sentient beings. One is the bald-faced hornet. It is the Nazi of the hornet world. I can't stand these things. Their sting is so terrible. Every time I see one, I have murderous thoughts. It's awful. And then I have to look at myself like, wow, there's still so much violence within me. The other great teacher of basic goodness is the tomato hornworm. Those are the creepiest caterpillar, crawly, gross, green. They're like the size of a mini hot dog. They're so awful and despicable. And anytime I see one, I want to fling it, and I hope for its traumatic body injury. It's terrible. Again, so much violence within me. I have no idea where their basic goodness lies. I think it's there, but I wonder. So these creatures really challenge me to find that basic goodness. And I share that with you because if any of you are struggling to find your basic goodness, you know, maybe in a previous life you were a tomato hornworm. It's okay if you're struggling to see it. Let's invite that to be okay. I think that's just real. And it's just a measure of the practice. It's a measure of where we need to maybe apply a little bit more effort, a little bit more exploration, and invite it to be friendly and gentle. I have the capacity for violence to live within me. I have the capacity to be unskillful. I have the capacity to ignore watering my seeds of basic goodness, as do I think many of us. And so the practice of love is to come back home and to begin to nurture, tending to that basic goodness within. It may be very small. You may have an inner critic within that poo-poos your every step, and that's okay. They're just doing their job. The inner critic's voice is never about praising you. The inner critic's voice is always about criticizing. And you can just acknowledge, yeah, you know, that's true. And one of the practices that I really like is that phrase, that's true. So when I am confronting some unskillful behavior, maybe a violent thought, maybe a feeling of aggression or hostility, maybe I have some regret over a judgment that I harbored towards someone, I can quickly clamp down on that. And before I know it, I have buried that seed of goodness within me under something really hard and packed. And one of the ways that I keep the conditions around my basic seed of goodness soft and supple is to say to myself, you know, Julia, that is true. You did that. That was unkind, unskillful. And here's the magic trick. The next thing, the next question is, what else is true? And that opens me up. Because right beside everything that's unskillful in me as a human being, there is all kinds of skill. But if I'm hyper-focused on the negative, I fail to see the positive. And that's what the equanimous practice is. Acknowledge the negative. Okay, yeah, that's true. What else is true? Don't forget the good stuff, because that's going to water the seeds. That's going to add to the conditions of growth. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche had many seeds of goodness. He was one of the main teachers of Pema Chodron, who has made an extraordinary contribution to the lineage of Mahayana Buddhism. And he got lost in his own myth. Each of us here has wonderful seeds of goodness, and many of us have experienced being lost in confusion, in negative habit energy, and we are finding our way back to the light, into the arms of incorruptible, limitless love. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and end our practice today with a dedication of merit. And let's just bring this all back in our dedication of merit with the sentiment of loving kindness that prefaced our practice today as our motivation and our intention. It is, may you be open. May you be open to the conditions of loving others is loving myself. Loving myself is loving others. Loving nature, nurturing the earth, the waters, the gardens, is nurturing others and myself. Thich Nhat Hanh was famous for bringing into our consciousness the notion of interbeing. We are intimately connected to all of life. To insist that things are strictly separated and frankly severed is a distortion of reality. We can never be separated from the infinite nature of love. And something to take into as a little fertilizer for that beautiful seed of goodness. You have never been, nor shall you ever be, a mistake in the eyes of the divine. Thank you for your practice, friends. We'll see you next time. Namaste.